Hi, welcome to the AFCA podcast. My name is Brandon Collins, and on this episode, I spoke with Claudia Puig from the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. Claudia is a distinguished film critic and journalist with a career spanning several decades, including roles at USA Today and NPR. In 2021, she was appointed programming director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, where she oversees the selection of films and contributes to the festival's strategic direction. Claudia's extensive experience and commitment to cinematic excellence has been instrumental in enhancing the Santa Barbara International Film Festival's reputation as a premier film festival. I greatly enjoyed my conversation with Claudia and hope you will too. We'll be sharing our full interview in just a moment. The AFCA podcast is sponsored by Morgan Stanley, Global Sports and Entertainment. It's fantastic to be able to talk to you. Before we get into your work with the film festival itself, I would love to just talk about your journey from being a journalist to a film critic and becoming the programming director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival.
Yeah, it's I'm not the first to do it. There have been a couple other film critics, I think maybe one or two that have done it, but it's kind of a natural progression in that as a film critic, you're curating and you're encouraging people to see certain films and discouraging them from other ones. So it's mostly just on the positive side, right? You're just curating films that are good that people should be seeing, and you're not having to do the negative work, which is, having to write a bad review, having to pan something, so it's actually it's the most positive aspect of what we do, because I feel like as a film critic, I've always been more of a kind of a film zealot or a film, like somebody who encourages and promotes and wants people to see certain films. It's not so much about like saying, oh, thumbs down on that one. It's more about, oh, you should see this. It's sort of the glass half full, half empty kind of thing. So I feel like as a film festival program director, I'm able to do that. And by actually programming the films as opposed to just writing a review and, hoping people will go see the film, you actually put the films in front of people that they might otherwise never get a chance to see. And I feel particularly strongly about films that help people sort of be more compassionate, be more open-minded, be more understanding of other cultures, of other people, have a window into the lives of people that they might ordinarily never come into contact with. It's part of my belief in diversity and having us all finding a way that film can bring us together and enlighten us and improve us. And so by curating film festivals, that's what you get to do. So it's kind of the best part. It's like sort of picking and choosing the best parts of critiquing film. So it's been a real joy to be able to do this, because it is something. I'm a film booster, I'm a film advocate, as opposed to having to do the negative stuff.
Now, from your position, I imagine there's a lot of folks under you that are the ones that have to watch probably every submission or every film that's being considered, and then you get to, what is that like? Do you get to watch the top, tier that are in the running for consideration for the programming, or how many films do you tend to watch as you're preparing for the next festival?
I think that may be the case for some of the bigger festivals. We are pretty lean, and there's just four of us on the programming team. So I watch as much as or more than my, as my team. We do have screeners. We have about 30 screeners that watch films and sort of rate them on a scale of like 1 to 5.
Okay.
And then there's additional films that we get sent to us, either directly sent to us or sent via distributors. And then we watch those, but I will go in and just watch stuff. And if somebody gave something a 3, but it's by a filmmaker that I know of, or the topic sounds interesting, or, I'm even if it doesn't get a high rating, I'll go in and watch it anyway. So I don't just watch the upper crust of films. I'm watch several, like we have about 4,000 4 to 5,000 films submitted. And I'd say that I watch probably at least a few hundred.
Okay.
And then with the programming team, what we do is we sort of I'll assign everybody to watch certain things, or they'll pick off things and go, oh, I'm interested in this. And then usually we'll have at least one other viewing. Sometimes all four of us will have seen it. Sometimes three of us out of four will have seen it. So pretty much I will have seen everything that we end up choosing for the 200 slots. And we have discussions about it. It's actually for someone who loves film, as my whole team does. One is a filmmaker, one is another film festival person, and one is a recent graduate of film school. So we, in our meetings, we discuss films and we analyze them and we talk about them and what made them good and what made them not so good, all that stuff. So it's a pretty in-depth process for a good almost 6 months of discussing and weighing certain things. And some of them are slam dunks, so not that much need for discussion, but some of them are ones we need to discuss and fight for. And what's been nice is that I think we're all pretty much on the same page. A good film is a good film, and we rarely disagree. There might be something that somebody likes a little more, but yeah.
Do you recall a film that there was a pretty sizable divide amongst you all? Like obviously appreciating the art that was presented to you, but that you were really debating whether or not it was a good fit for the festival?
We haven't had any really big divides. We've had some where there's one person really likes slow cinema, and I don't mind some slow cinema, but some of it I think you have to think about our audience too. And sometimes it's about it's not the Claudia Festival, it's not
Yep.
the programming team festival, it's the festival for Santa Barbara. So sometimes we pick things that we think the audience will love that we liked, but we know they're going to love it. Or sometimes there are things that we as kind of cinephiles will love, but we're like, I don't know about the audience. And, you know, um, so yeah, we have to always keep the audience in mind and be mindful of that. And I think the audience, um, you know, well, I'll give you an example of something that I hesitated about. There
Okay.
was a film my first year, and I didn't know the audience that well yet. So now I know it better because it's my fourth year. But there was a film that I watched on they send them into this sort of portal which is called Film Freeway. All the film festivals use it. And it was an Irish film, all in Irish, and it was set in this adorable little town. And the storyline was about a widow who was, grieving her husband, and then this adorable shaggy dog comes along and does these things, and she's convinced it's the reincarnation of her husband as this shaggy dog. And then they're playing this game, and it's charming, but it's also like I was like, yeah, it's kind of charming, but is it kind of corny? And I was like wrestling with that. And I ended up on the side of I think it's charming, and people love dogs, and the Irish locale is cute, and they had a few little surprises. It turned out to be, and I hesitated, and I, was really on the fence. It turned out to be the audience award winner. So it taught me kind of, I guess, trust your instincts,
Mhm.
but it told me something about the audience that, the audience is different from an audience of film critics, obviously.
Of course, of course. Speaking of your audience, how do you feel that the Santa Barbara International Film Festival differs from other prestigious film festivals? What makes it very unique for an audience member?
Um, I think, I mean, all film festivals have a certain, shared DNA. But I would say that there are some very specific likes and dislikes for Santa Barbara, or not likes and dislikes, but specific interests of Santa Barbara. For instance, we're on the coast, so anything to do with ocean life, sea
Mhm.
life, sea creatures, whales, and ocean sports, surfing, swimming, all that kind of stuff. That maybe, if it's the I don't know, film festival in Iowa, they're not going to be as interested in those things. Um, and there are certain things that are just intensified, I think. And it's, you don't just want to make a movie that sort of, or you don't just want to accept movies that are just about that. But then we have some really interesting films that are submitted. Last year there was a film, a documentary about Black surfers and sort of what it was like to not be a blonde-haired guy, surfing guy. That's our image of what surfers are. And this documentary noted that surfing went back to Africa, way back when. And so there's all this stuff that we learned about surfing. And so I feel like, okay, this is an interesting documentary. It's not just, oh, look, there's a guy on a surfboard, doing that and watching big curls, but it's something that you can actually learn from. So that's what I'm always looking for, a way to kind of have those films that kind of fall into these interests that are a little different that might teach you something.
I appreciate that, and given that extra context on how you go about approaching your programming. I want to get a little bit more personal with you and ask, what was the film that had the greatest impact on you growing up, and how did that influence you as a film critic?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. You know, the one that comes to mind initially, and it comes to mind maybe for a lot of reasons, but one is that my parents both loved film. So I grew up kind of steeped in that. And my dad loved arty foreign films. So he would take me to like Fellini films or Truffaut films, and
Okay.
probably before I was even of the appropriate age for it.
Mhm.
And I think when they kind of realized that they would send me out for popcorn or something, it's like, oh, she shouldn't be seeing this. But my mother was really into like classic Hollywood films, sort of. She had been on contract with MGM. She was from Puerto Mexico, spoke Spanish, so she dubbed movies into Spanish, and she
Oh
dubbed a
wow.
movie. Yeah, Meet Me in St. Louis was one of them. And she did the Judy Garland character. So she was real. She'd been into movies since she was a little girl. She was one of eight, and that's what they would. She and her older sister would go to movies all the time. So I remember her telling me when I was about 10, she sat me down and said, okay, To Kill a Mockingbird, this is a really good film. I want you to watch this, or like just sit down and watch this, and kind of encouraged me to do it. And I did. And she talked about, the storyline. She talked about, Gregory Peck's role. She just like, we kind of discussed it, I remember. And so I kind of carried that on. That when I had my two daughters, I did a similar thing when they were about the same age. It's like, okay, you got to watch this film. So it had, I guess I would say that one, but then also when I was five, my dad was a college teacher, so he was on sabbatical. We were living in Switzerland, and we would do little trips, little weekend trips from there. So we
Yeah.
were in Paris, and we went I'd never actually been in a movie theater. I was five. So they took me to my first movie, and it happened to be in Paris. It sounds really obnoxious. My first movie was in Paris. It was this movie, and it was West Side Story.
Oh wow.
Um, and I remembered that making like an impact on me. And of course, being Latina, hearing
Mhm.
Spanish, I realized all the problems with that. And I realized some of the problems with To Kill a Mockingbird too, White Savior, all that stuff. But, kind of looking beyond all
But
that,
the
I
joy
just
is
remember,
pure. That's what's important. Is that's pure, like the
yes.
emotion you're feeling there.
Yeah, the emotion is pure. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So, I remember just West Side Story. And I actually ran into, or Rita Moreno came to our film festival last year, the year
Oh
before. And I
wow,
remember
man.
telling her, I know it's so cool.
That'd be
Like in her
amazing for you.
90s, she's amazing. And I said, I have to tell you, I think that the first movie I ever saw was West Side Story, and I think it made an impact on my choice for my career. I said I became a film critic, and I think it had to do with that at a very seminal time in my life. And she was so sweet. She's like, "Oh, and I read your reviews." Yes, she was super nice. I was just like, "Oh my God, she's read my reviews." But I think that made a real impact on me.
Yeah.
Because I remember loving the music. I remember just being completely swept up. So I would say those two, one at five, one at 10, were really key.
I mean, those are great picks, though, especially from like a film, making, perspective. That those are phenomenal films that you can go back and see influences
Yeah.
today with today's filmmakers.
Yeah, right.
Which leads me to my next question, which was, what was the first film you professionally critiqued?
Oh, I think it was Training Day,
Oh
um,
wow, okay.
which I loved. I felt so lucky. Yeah.
Did you
Because I,
know? Okay, I
oh,
have a question because I'm also a film critic too, and sometimes you
oh,
watch performances and you're like, they're gonna get they're gonna get a lot of award recognition. Like I don't
I
know if it's
knew
gonna be
I
the
knew
Oscar.
Denzel would.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
I was just
But here's the
curious.
funny thing. So the year before that, he'd been in Hurricane. Do you remember that?
Oh, of course.
Hurricane Carter. Yeah. And so we thought he was, so we being USA Today, when I was working for them, I was a critic for them for 15 years. And we thought he was going to win it that year. So we planned this thing where we had Sidney Poitier, where I was interviewing Sidney Poitier and Denzel Washington together. I remember where I was. I remember everything about it. I remember what they drank, green tea and decaf coffee, sitting in Four Seasons. And because we thought it was like passing the mantle. There had not been a best actor who had been African American since Sidney Poitier, and we thought, oh, it's going to go to Denzel for Hurricane. So we do this whole thing. It didn't go to Denzel that year, and but it was still a great interview because it was the two of them interacting was so cool. And
Was that
I
Russell's year, Russell Crowe's year for Gladiator?
probably was,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. And but then the following year it did happen and it was, he was even better. So it went for the right role. But I remember I came in right after 9/11. And that movie came out like I think a month or it was like maybe later in September. It was very close to 9/11. And so we were, everybody was a little bit like, oh, is this going to be a problem? But I remember thinking, oh my God, I get to review this movie. This is amazing. Because I was still like the second ranked person that would have been a film critic who was like the main person. And I was getting the other stuff. So I wasn't usually getting the best movies. And I don't know how it was that I ended up getting that one. I got lucky. Sometimes you just couldn't make it to certain movies.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my first one. So it's pretty good.
Okay. Oh, wow. So yeah, if you were at USA Today writing reviews back then, I probably was reading your reviews. I was the kid that was like reading all the movie critiques and everything in the newspaper, folks. By the way, this is back when print was still a thing. Um,
Yeah.
from your experience at USA Today, like what was that like? What were some lessons you learned from being a critic for them?
Oh my gosh. Well, brevity, USA Today. I'd worked at the LA Times before that, for 11 years, and I had not been a critic. I'd been a reporter, but I'd started out covering like cops and courts and police beat. I was the night cops reporter when Michael Connolly, the famous author,
Mhm.
was the day cops person. And I always joke that, he actually did something good. I walked away going, I hate cops. And he walked away going, I'm going to become a writer and write all these great stories.
Mhm.
So he walked away with a whole lot more than I did. But anyway, I eventually moved into, I always wanted to, well, I realized at a certain point I wanted to review movies, and I kind of asked to do that once I went to USA Today. And at first they were like, no, we have critics already. And then I just kind of kept at it. And I said, hey, I'm the only one in the little film group who has kids. Can I do kids movies? Can I do family movies? And they were like, okay. And then they let me do like a faux review, like let's try this out as, see, and it was a movie called Dog of Flanders.
Okay.
Nobody saw it. And it was a dog movie. And I wrote something and they liked it. And then they said, okay, can you try your hand? And they said, do Knight's Tale. And these were not going to be in print. They were just like my little tests.
Yeah.
So I did Knight's Tale. And then there was another one, which I don't even remember now. But anyway, I passed the test and they're like, okay, we can have you be the second, or maybe might have even been the third tier person. I can't even remember, but so I kind of wormed my way in. I don't even think I'm answering your question now. Oh, what I learned at USA
Yes.
Today. Um, yeah, so I learned, well, one of the things I learned was there was a good movie in every genre. And I always thought, everybody has their personal things that they're drawn to. And I always thought, I don't really like Westerns. And
I
I
hear you
learned that,
there.
yeah, like Unforgiven, there's some great Westerns. And then people were like, oh, horror movies. No, there's some really good horror movies. So there is no, and there are bad movies in every genre too. And people always say, what's your favorite kind of movie? I don't have a favorite genre. I don't have a favorite kind of movie. It just needs to be a good movie. I mean, I like small indies. I like some big Hollywood movies. I like foreign films. I like documentaries, like animated, I mean, but that was kind of a revelation to me is that, and also just not having preconceived notions as much as you possibly can. We all do, and if you have them, be aware of them, like, um, I'd read some articles about Scientology and I wasn't a huge fan of Tom Cruise, but I can tell you that I think Tom Cruise was great in Magnolia and great in Collateral, and I like him as a
Yes.
villain.
Yes. Yes. I
So
feel the same way. It's very tough for me to separate the person from the art,
it's
but
very hard. Yeah, or like
it's
Woody Allen is a really tough one.
yes, yes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
well, go on.
No, no. I was just curious about when you like loving a variety of films and everything like that. Like, how does that present a challenge when you're curating the programming for a festival? Like, the Santa Barbara International Film Festival?
Loving a variety of films. Yeah, well, I know, for instance, our audience is not, they're kind of, they're all ages, but I would say the majority are older. So they don't necessarily like horror movies. I mean, I'm sure they would like Get Out, because it's more than just a horror movie, but for the most part, they don't like we don't have midnight movies, we don't have like edgy horror movies. That's just not something that they are drawn to. So we don't have them.
And do
Um,
you suss that out through attendance for like, previous films in those genres, like surveys?
Both,
Okay.
both, yeah. The film's this is the 40th year, so obviously it precedes me. I just started 4 years ago. And I've, people will tell me, people who've been there for a long time, these haven't done well. And then I'll look every year, we look at what the attendance was, what did well, what didn't do well. We know they love like inspirational documentaries, and we know they love foreign films, thrillers, yeah, so it's kind of, doing the assessments and then talking to people too. Sometimes people come up to you and go, I liked everything except that film. And I don't feel like it's bad. I think you can have a couple films that challenge people or that are controversial. I like that. I don't think that a film festival should be all like sweetness and light by any means. I think you should have some films that are like going to divide people because that's part of the process, and films that get people talking and stuff. So I don't mind if people tell me they didn't like a film or two, but if they didn't like a lot of them, that would be a problem.
Mm. Is there a film or filmmaker that you have really been championing since you became aware of their work, like after you started working at the film festival?
Oh, at the film festival. Um, there have been a few that I've really liked their first films, and I'll be like, yeah, I really want to see the next film that you do. Um, and sometimes they're filmmakers, they're women or filmmakers of color, or just their work is so, they did something so interesting. And sometimes they're people that I knew of from before, whose films I've liked, but have been either I've seen at other film festivals or have been a little under the radar. I mean, obviously, we're not going to get like Christopher Nolan's film, and it's not going to be a premiere or a Spielberg or a Scorsese film. I mean, but in terms of I mean, I have lots of filmmakers whose work I really like and who I
Yeah.
admire. And then sometimes you find work that you think, oh, this is a lot like, um, you know, Wes Anderson. This has that vibe or something. Or this is, it's not necessarily a good example because I'm very mixed on Wes Anderson, but um, there's a lot of copycats too.
Yep.
Uh, or Tarantino-esque or something like that. But yeah, so there are certain filmmakers that you do, you really like them, and then they come back as an alum filmmaker. And but then there's the times when, someone made a good film and then they come back and then their second film isn't up to snuff, and that's always hard because you got to know them a little bit. They were alums. I'm waiting for somebody. I've only been doing it for 4 years. But I'm waiting for somebody to just be like break out and be huge, and then
Mm.
we'll be like, oh, I showed their first film.
Do you still have faith that that's possible, given the kind of the contraction we've been seeing in the business this past like year or so?
Yeah, it's hard to have that kind of faith. I mean, the business is in a really tough situation, as you know, and it's contracting, as you say. So I guess I still have faith because I tend to be an optimistic person and I want to have faith. But it's probably less likely. I mean, when you think you go back to like the history of like, say, Sundance, Steven Soderbergh started there, or Sex, Lies and Videotape, those
Yep.
kinds of like seminal films that played there. But it took a while for him to become like a huge name. So I think it could happen. I mean, they may never get to that level or a really big level, but they'll get to a certain point. I think there's a chance, but of course, what we're seeing is fewer films getting distribution or getting distribution in, barely being seen. That's always for frustration. And probably one of my greatest frustrations, not that you necessarily asked, but since I'm
No, this
about
is what we're
it,
talking about.
I'm gonna rant about this. Um, is that nobody, I keep saying if you really want to get into a film festival, make a good comedy. And which is hard, really hard. Everybody makes really dark, grim, important movies, a lot of like family dysfunction, a lot of like abuse. And of course, there's room for that. And some of those are very moving films, but people do want a good comedy. And I point to something like Thelma, which I think maybe came the
Oh, I love
closest.
Thelma.
I know,
That was so
right?
cute.
Yeah, so good. And we need more Thelmas, we need more Little Miss Sunshines, even more Real Pain, those kinds of films that there's more substance to them. They're not just pure comedy, but they have good performances and you walk away. Yeah, the fact that we can name three and only three,
Yeah.
is not a good thing. And so I kind of tell people, I realize that making a good comedy is probably the hardest thing to do because I think it's easier to make a good, not none of it's easy, but it's easier to make a good drama, I think, than to make a consistently good comedy. But if you can do it, those are the ones that people watch over and over again too.
Mm, absolutely. I know we're coming up on time, so my last question for you is, how do you balance it all? Because we didn't even talk about your work as the president of the Los Angeles Film, Critics Association. We're just talking about your
I
work with
think,
the film
oh yeah.
festival and everything. How do you just balance all these roles and then have a life outside of film? How does
Yeah,
Claudia's
it's
life?
a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge for all of us, right? Balancing our work and our life, the work-life balance. I have a lot of energy and I think it's because I love what I do. It
Mm,
actually infuses me with more energy. It kind of gets so I and the one of the great advantages is I really work on this from like August to February. And then I work on two other film festivals, but they're much smaller. And sometimes I can bring some of the films from this festival to that. So that's one way to balance it. I work really hard for these 6 or 7 months, and then I kind of work a little less hard for the next few months. But yeah, I still review films on NPR, on LAist, and I'm no longer president of the LA Film Critics. I did step down from that.
oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
Apologies.
So yeah, no, it's okay. I did it for 7 years and it was quite a balance, especially this time of year
Mm,
because this is the time
award
where we're
season.
putting together our big show and the award
Yeah.
season. Yeah. So this was always my most intense time of year. Plus, I'd been president longer than anybody had ever been president there, and I didn't want to be, didn't want to be Donald Trump and say no more elections.
Yep.
Um, so it was time for some new blood.
Understood.
So yeah. But no, I think the balance thing is hard for everybody. And I fortunately I have two daughters who are grown. So that's, that helps. If I were doing this and I had small kids, I think it would be much harder.
Mm,
But my husband's retired. We do a lot of traveling.
yeah.
I think he'd like me to go on more hikes with him and things like that. And I try to fit it all in and I, probably should sleep more. I don't know.
Who needs sleep when you have movies? Claudia,
Right?
thank you so much for this great conversation. Please tell the
Thank
listeners how they can
you.
keep up with whatever you're working on, as well as the Santa Barbara International Film Festival.
Oh, yeah. So it's spiff.org. And that will tell you the one thing I didn't get to say before is that we also have, there's kind of like a two-pronged thing to the film festival. There's all the films, 200 films over the course of 11 days this year. Normally it's 10, but because it's our 40th anniversary, we added a day. But we also have awards that we give out to the people who are in the awards conversation. So this year it's Zoe Saldana, Coleman Domingo, Ray Fiennes, Angelina Jolie, the usual suspects
Yeah.
so we give tribute awards to those, and those happen in the evening. So for me, one of the main draw to that is that could bring people over to the film festival because there's like two separate things going on. So you'll see all that when you go on spiff.org. And then we also do, conversations about like documentary activism. We have panels about that in addition to the Q&As following the festival. It's a really fun time. And for some reason, I don't know what it is, but the weather always cooperates. And we tend to have like beautiful weather during the 10 days in February. So for people who come from like places where it's cold,
Yep.
it's really nice. So
Fantastic. Thank you again,
yeah,
Claudia, for your time. Really appreciate it, and good luck with
thank
this
you.
this year's festival.
Thank you so much. Come up for it. And thanks for the chat.
Thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Claudia Puig. We look forward to you joining us on the next episode of the AFCA podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast application so you're alerted about new episodes as soon as they're released. You can find all things AFCA at AFCA.com or follow us at AFCA on Instagram. Have a great day.